My presentation actually builds on a lot of what Aletha just presented, and you will see that there's areas of overlap, but there are also differences in perspective. I just want to say that in my project management training, I find that the most frequent answer to questions is it depends. So there are principles, there are best practices, but every project, by definition, is different, and every organization and its culture is different. So I'm going to be presenting some guidelines that should help you. But on the other hand, you need to tailor this information to your own organizations and to your types of projects. So the title is Rules of Engagement. So engagement is the strategy for working with stakeholders. But I am focused specifically on one category of stakeholders, and that is your teams. So as I go through the presentation, we will kind of zoom in and out from the teams and look at how they fit within your organization as well. And I am just jumping right into my presentation. So here is the agenda. We're going to identify unique traits and motivations of team members at nonprofit organizations. And we're going to apply some project management tools that will strengthen team engagement and also establish ground rules. We'll also design strategies that optimize the team performance and address common challenges. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to develop a leadership approach that balances governance with active participation. So let's talk about what makes nonprofit teams special. And I actually think that they are special, having worked in a variety of contexts for project management. And what I will say is we're going to be looking at traits and characteristics that you will frequently find in the job descriptions for nonprofits. So the first thing is there's a strong commitment to the mission or cause of that nonprofit organization. So people have a strong sense of purpose, and they're deeply committed to their cause. And they're passionate. They have lots of energy because they're motivated due to that cause. In addition, they have a strong work ethic and they're really dedicated to their job. And in many cases, they also have a sense of identification with their organization. The next trait is what I'm calling in general intellectual capacity. So yes, it is intelligence, but it's also creativity and curiosity and ambition. They just want to do things better and do more. So they frequently have a drive for excellence, and this can sometimes veer off into perfectionism. And they also are eager to learn new information and new skills. The next trait is they tend to be subject matter experts. So they frequently have higher education, usually undergraduate degrees, but often graduate or advanced degrees within the subject area of that nonprofit organization. So, for example, the example that Aletha described, they either had medical or MPH degrees. So they have professional expertise and experience. so they can have deep subject matter knowledge related to the organization's mission, but also strong functional knowledge, sort of general management skills. So even if they are working in a support department, they are experts in that area. With all of that education and experience, they tend to be confident and optimistic. At senior levels, they have solid experience. And at junior levels, they have growth objectives. They want to learn more and do more. The next trait is the issue of collaboration. So they tend to make collaboration a priority. And they have enthusiasm for teamwork. This can also lead to a desire for consensus. This is that kind of flat structure that Aletha described. However, they have the ability to work collaboratively, but also independently. So they're used to shifting back and forth between concentrating on a single task that they are doing and then working collaboratively and meeting with groups of people. Because of this, they actually do have strong interpersonal skills and strong communication skills. And they are looking for a sense of community. But there are challenges when you combine all these traits. So they are positive, but they have a flip side. So because they do work very closely together, collaboration and community is important. They can develop complex relationships, either at the team level or the organizational level. So it's hard to pull things apart and know where there is collaboration and where there is conflict. So this close contact can lead to conflict. Because of their experience, and they're often people in roles with seniority, there can be resistance to change. And sometimes hesitation about top-down decisions. Sometimes there's also frustration because of limited career growth opportunities. Now, this partly depends on the size of your organization. And then finally, because of that level of energy and commitment, team members often put themselves at the risk of burnout. So any engagement strategy has to take into account the challenges and the unique strengths of your nonprofit teams. So let's move into talking about project management tools that will help you with engaging your team members. So I just want to mention that engagement has two aspects. One is interaction, such as meetings, the level of contact between the different stakeholders or team members, and the other is communication, and communication in a variety of methods. Because of the unique characteristics of nonprofit team members, this sets a very high bar for engagement. And we'll see how some of these tools indicate that. So this is a very basic tool for stakeholder analysis. We're basically comparing a level of power and a level of interest. So the overall model shows 4 quadrants, and each quadrant is associated with a particular stakeholder engagement strategy. Due to everything we've just seen about what makes nonprofit team members unique, it is highly leaning towards the right side of the model. So at every level, people tend to be interested in what is going on with projects and they want to be involved. So the upper right-hand quadrant that says manage closely, this requires the greatest level of effort to gain the support of your team members, and they should have high level of interest. They do, they're motivated, but also high level of power. So when we talk about power, that is kind of relative. So sometimes it's obvious. This is where you will find the project sponsor, senior executives at the organization, the funder for a project, the team leader or project manager for the project. But any team member is also in this quadrant because you need everyone to be working together and delivering on their commitments. The other area that's interesting is where they do not have as much direct power in the organization or within the project itself, but they're still going to be interested. So you need to keep them informed and involve them maybe a little more actively than you might expect. And this is important because these are influencers within your organization who can help be champions for your project, even if they're not directly involved. The last thing that I'll point out about this, and this is true of almost everything in project management, is that we are looking at a snapshot of a dynamic environment. So people are going to be changing roles. And this is why you want to maintain a high level of engagement and communication, because people can move back and forth between these two quadrants. So this is going to point to what kind of engagement strategy do we need. So let's do a little bit more analysis. So this is another project management tool for stakeholder assessment. And here what we're looking at is at the beginning of the project and later in the project, what is the current level of engagement versus the desired level. And there are 5 states of engagement or involvement. You could think of it as involvement. So at one point, people are unaware. Then the issue is, well, they at least need to know about it so that they could be neutral. But maybe we need to move them to be more supportive, and maybe we need them in a leading position. Often the people who need to be in a leading position are already at that point. Your team lead, your sponsor, your funders. So their current and desired level are likely to be the same. But we have this other state. And sometimes when they showed this assessment matrix, they put it between unaware and neutral, but I really want to take it out of that flow because being resistant, this is a negative impact on your project. So being neutral, supportive, or leading are desired states, but being resistant is never a desired state. And the size of the arrows here kind of indicates the difficulty of moving people from a current to a desired state. So anytime you have to move someone from the resistant state, you have a major challenge. So this is an overview for the average project. But for nonprofits, We'll see some things are the same and some things are different. So, yes, we will often have people who are both in the current and desired state from the beginning, then people we have to sort of move along. And when we are moving people into the leading role, if they're not there to begin with, I would say this is a larger challenge at nonprofits. And this is because the people who you need to be in those leading roles already take their responsibilities very seriously. And being moved into that higher level of responsibility, they might think twice because they're not sure that they can really fulfill the requirements. And another thing that affects nonprofits to a degree that's not found in other sectors is the constraint of allocations. So they might be concerned that they will become over allocated and not be able to live up to their responsibilities on all of their projects. So the more senior level people for the project, the sponsor and maybe other executives need to help them find a way to meet all of their obligations. The other thing that I would say is that moving a team member, like number 6 here, from being resistant to just getting to neutral is a heavier lift in a nonprofit. Again, they're worried about their allocations. They don't want to get burned out. But in addition, they're smart. And once they become resistant, they can have a very logical rationale for why they're opposed to the project. So now the project lead or the sponsor or other champions for your project need to be that much more persuasive to help change their mind. And the last two, I think, are unique situations for nonprofits. So you could have team member 7 who starts out as being supportive. At some point during the execution, they become disillusioned. And then they flip and become resistant. Now you actually have to move them back from being resistant to that supportive state again. So remember, resistant is never a good thing, but it is going to be even more of a challenge because they started out supportive and something changed their mind, and they are going to be able to defend that position in a very intellectual way. And so the champions need to help bring them back to having a positive attitude towards the project. The final unique situation is somebody starting out in a leading attitude, and they don't need to be that involved. They need to step back. You want them to be supportive, but they don't need to be leading. So this is unusual. And this is because people are motivated and they're interested and they just want to get involved. But we need to find the right level of support. So what we're looking at is how do we find the right level of support for all of these different team members. And this brings us to a tool that you've already heard about, the RACI chart. So Aletha did a very good job of describing a RACI chart, but here one is that you can look at. So we have a list of all of the tasks for a project, and we have the list of our team members. And we have the 4 different levels of responsibility. 3 of them, the people have an active role. They're either responsible or they have ownership for it. They're accountable, which is the ultimate ownership. In the words, the buck stops here. They have consult, where they're using their subject matter expert to benefit the project. And then the last one, this is kind of passive. They're not doing the informing, they are being informed. But this is 4 different levels of responsibility. So you can really fine tune the contributions of all of your team members because we have 4 levels of responsibility. And we also have the flexibility of adapting their involvement for each individual task. So I'll just give you a few ground rules for a RACI chart. So every task has to have one team member who's responsible and one team member who is accountable. Multiple people could be responsible, as in task 4, but only one person can have that ultimate accountability. You could consider the consult and inform categories as optional, but I think it is actually very important to include them because these are your team members, and your team members are always working together. So they always have some role, even if they might be stepping back temporarily into the inform role, they are still there. And they need to hear about what's going on. So this is the way that you can work with some of the challenges that we saw in the stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. So if somebody's concerned it's too much work, they don't always have to be accountable or responsible for every task. There will be tasks where they can step back to have less responsibility, either consulting or getting informed. If somebody wants more involvement, then you have the opportunity to give them more responsibility for a particular task so they don't feel left out. And this also can help you understand how to work with people who are resistant and have to come back and become supportive. And I'm saying that having multiple roles and multiple levels of responsibility put a strong emphasis on collaboration within the team. The RACI chart is usually created during the planning phase of a project. So it's early, but you already have a team. This is not something that is created by the project lead and then enforced. The team works together. So this is a way for the team to start to look together and figure out where can I make the best contribution to the team for an individual task and for the project as a whole. So not only is this creating a team, it is a technique for team building in itself. And the next tool also is developed during the planning phase of a project, and it's called the team charter. And this is a tool that's often overlooked. The feeling is we have a project charter, we know what we're supposed to do, we have assignments for our tasks, let's just get started on the work. But this is also important for team building. Not everyone on the team knows each other. Not everyone on the team has the same level of experience working on projects. So it is very important to establish ground rules. Reaffirm your team values. establish a code of conduct. What is the expected behavior? And what are the preferred kinds of communication? And how do you communicate using different methods at different situations? Another important thing to include in your team charter are meeting guidelines. So some people might consider meetings as a necessary evil, but if you have clear meeting guidelines, then they really become one of the best methods for interactive communication and very productive. And the team charter can also define how do you resolve conflicts and how are you making decisions. So the team charter is by the team, for the team. So it is going to encourage consensus. It empowers the team. It will improve your productivity and reduce misunderstandings because you're not making assumptions. You are explicitly saying, this is how we do things. And then the last thing that I'll say about the team charter is when other stakeholders from outside the team or even outside the organization interact with that project team, they should respect the team charter. So this is a way that the team empowers itself. So building on that, let's move on and talk about the engagement strategy. How do we organize our teams to maximize performance? And the strategy here is what I call sharing is caring. So we already know that the team wants to be empowered. So engagement means empowerment. So based on all of this analysis, we want to empower our teams. And we know that the team members have joined the project already motivated with a great deal of expertise. So now we want to leverage that by empowering the team members. So the team leads and executives at the organization need to learn how to share the power with the team members so that you can really benefit from all of their knowledge and skills. So there is a flow from empowerment to engagement to communication to performance and to motivation, and it is a continuous cycle. But beyond that, there is interaction between each of these elements. So the more you empower your team members, the more engaged they are. The more engaged they are, the more they feel empowered, and the better their performance will be. When they see that they're making results, they'll be even more motivated. So this has multiple positive feedback loops built into it. The other thing that I have to say, and this kind of goes back to what Professor Wu was saying at the beginning, is that we're sometimes going to have to say some uncomfortable things. So here, what I'm saying is that empowerment is not just delegation. Delegation still is following a hierarchy that controls the team members rather than empowering them. Really empowering your team members is a different mindset where you are willing to share power and you trust people. So let's just quickly compare the difference between delegation and empowerment. So delegation is about doing the work, assigning specific tasks, giving instructions to the team members, defining the standards to them so that they satisfy the team lead. Um, you might accept their input, but they don't have decision-making power. You might even limit their access to information and say on an as-needed basis. And there's a strong emphasis on deadlines. So the focus in delegation is on execution and efficiency. But empowerment is about owning the work. It's about everybody owning the work together. So you grant authority and autonomy to the team members. You give them some initiative to define their own process and activities. And you want to build their confidence and their capabilities. This involves collaborative decision making and maintaining an open flow of information so that all of the team members throughout the project will understand their shared goals. And the focus is on growth and ownership. This has benefits both for the project and for the organization as a whole. Let's come back and look at some best practices for project management. So we can create empowerment for our teams at every stage in the project lifecycle. I'm just highlighting a few activities that are most productive to create this sense of empowerment. And I just want to underline this because often the best practices and these processes get lost in the drive to move forward and start getting results. So a lot of project management is in the early stages before you're even doing anything, right? So first of all, at the ideation stage, any team member should be allowed to suggest an idea for a project. In the initiation phase, if we are looking at an external source, such as a funder, foundation, or governmental agency, let all the team members collaborate on the proposal. If it is a project that is generated internally, let all the team members collaborate on the project charter. And this is a good point to develop a rapport between your team members and the development or grant writing division in your organization. As we move into planning and we're starting to look at things in more detail, this is the moment where the team creates the team charter and the team works with the team lead to create the RACI chart and allow them to participate in all kinds of other planning meetings, as well as the planning that's involved in setting up the project management software for your project, and even creating additional templates relevant to your project. And at this point, as you're getting ready to move into execution and have to be thinking more closely about budget constraints, this is a good time to develop a relationship with the finance or accounting department in your organization. So now we arrive at execution. And this looks simple. Let them work as a cross-functional, self-directed team. And even though these exact words have not always been used, project management has an obsession with high-performance teams, and these are the characteristics of a high-performance team. But some of you might actually recognize these specific words. Cross-functional, self-directed team. This is the mantra for agile teams. And I just want to give a little shout out again to Professor Wu, who recently wrote an article that proposed that agile is the best approach for nonprofit organizations. In addition, during the execution phase, you're going to be coordinating activities with your external partners. You're going to be communicating and reporting within the team, within the project, within the organization. So it's possible that the team lead could share that responsibility with other team members and even rotate some of these communications responsibilities across team members so that they gain more skills and confidence with their communication skills. So you could see this as being on the job stretch activities to improve their skills. And you can also include other kinds of training, whether it's formal, informal, or coaching, to help team members master skills and knowledge that are necessary for the project. And then remember that we're looking for a collaborative environment, and that includes collaboration on decision making and problem solving. Moving on to monitoring, you can again harness the proactive attitude of your team members to make process improvements, course corrections, and changes to your project. Take advantage of their expertise for quality control of the outputs and results. And another area that is very important for many nonprofits is compliance, meeting certain legal or regulatory or industry standards. So again, leverage the expertise of your team members to ensure compliance where it's required. And people often forget that closing is the final stage of a project, and the team is still intact at this point. They can still contribute and help with the administrative closure and archiving. And the final activity for a project team is celebrating your achievements. This is again something that people quickly forget about. It's like, we're done, move on to the next thing. I highly recommend taking some time for recognition and rewards. Also, the team is going to be breaking up after the project ends. So this is the last chance to be together and acknowledge everything you've been through, the good and the bad, and to really celebrate what your accomplishments are. And it can be a very easy thing to do. One last meeting, maybe get together for breakfast or lunch or drinks, but just some kind of recognition. This empowers the team, not only when they think back on their experience on that project, but in looking forward to new projects with either the same people or even different people. So finally, let's take this team experience and expand it into the context of the organization as a whole. And here we need to talk about governance. So this is the potentially hierarchical structure for your organization. And here I'm saying it's important to find a balance between governance and collaboration. In other words, lead by letting go. So again, we're still talking about the equivalence of engagement and empowerment. And so in this model, we're seeing a lot of the elements we've already seen, but now we're adding in more of an organizational or governance perspective. So we are sharing power to enhance collaboration. But the empowerment needs to be balanced with accountability, and there will be appropriate levels of accountability. You might want to have a flatter organization, but it doesn't have to be completely flat. You can still have levels, but you need to find this balance. Find the right balance for your organization in its culture and its size between leadership and governance. That combination is then going to lead to the right kinds of communication that will support empowerment and shared decision making. So even if all of the people at the team level do not participate in the decision, they need to understand enough about the process for making that decision that they will accept it. And the more involved people are in understanding and making decisions, the more buy-in you have. So this is also generating trust. It's very important to have an environment of trust. When you put into place participation, empowerment, leadership, governance, communication, and trust, now you're able to channel all of that team energy into creating outcomes that benefit your mission and the mission of your funders. Again, this is very dynamic and it depends very much on your organization. Let's just quickly take a look at some of the key elements in this empowerment model. So first is leadership. This is your ability to inspire and guide people toward a shared goal through influence and vision. Leadership can create a participatory environment by encouraging collaboration, using communication to share the vision and maintain morale, and empowering team members across the organization in all divisions, departments, and all levels, creating that environment of trust and respect, and developing a sense of shared ownership so that people feel a commitment to the outcomes. And then also supporting both professional and personal growth. Balance that leadership with governance. So the governance is the structure that includes controls and policies that will underline decisions, accountability, compliance, and ethical conduct. Governance can also be adapted to a participatory environment. So maybe not flat, but maybe just a little less hierarchical. So create a framework for clear roles and accountability. Define a consistent approach to formal authority at the executive level. And find ways to loosen some of that authority to enhance collaboration. And foster transparency in decision makings and some flexibility for collaborative decision making. And from the governance perspective, it's important to provide opportunities for either promotions or lateral moves. So in Aletha's case study, she gave lots of example of all of this kind of governance activity happening. And then we have communication. So One of the definitions of project management in general is that it is 90% communication. That means sharing information, ideas, and messages in order to achieve common goals in collaboration with the team members and within the organizational environment. So communication is a key driver for connections and creating participation. So share open and ongoing communication to make sure that the goals are aligned. And engage people, that means actively involve them in order to motivate them to focus their efforts on the mission. And this is one of my other little harsh realities here. Align communication and action. So it can't just be lip service. Remember, empowerment is a mindset, and people at senior levels need to authentically believe in it. Um, you need to be the role model for it. It needs to be at a deeper level. And then to make your communication as effective as possible, use a variety of media methods and styles. And this is greatly empowered by current technology. And one of those technologies is your project management software system. Again, this is assuming that you've moved beyond just the spreadsheets and you're using some kind of software or system. And Aletha, again, gave great examples of how you can use a project management system for communication. And I also want to encourage people at senior levels, get into that system, have a login, have the software open. You can be proactive and look at any project or program or portfolio that you are interested in. You don't need to wait for the project lead to say, oh, we have a risk, or we need to escalate this. You can have your finger on the pulse yourself through the wonders of technology. And then just in general, the communication needs to be interactive. So it's multi-directional. And this will allow everyone on the team, as well as throughout the organization, to feel heard and valued. So now let's wrap things up and look at what are the takeaways from putting together all the pieces in my presentation. Keep in mind that nonprofit teams are deeply mission driven and they want to apply their talents to make an impact. Leaders at any level within the organization, from team leads to sponsors to senior executives, can create motivated teams that also understand their level of accountability. And this comes from balancing governance and empowerment. A participatory leadership style is going to enhance collaboration and include that collaboration in decision making in order to create deeper levels of engagement and better results for your projects. And then finally, combine communication, shared guidelines, and transparency so that team members can channel their enthusiasm and their expertise into performance and solid outcomes for your organization, for the project, and for your other stakeholders, including external stakeholders such as partners and funders. So that is my perspective. And um, I'd love to hear what your questions are.
Hi, Mimi. Thank you so much for that very thorough and detailed coverage of the rules of engagement. There was a question that came up earlier on the power interest grid. In that grid that you're looking at, where does partners belong? I'm assuming active business partners.
Partners would probably be in that upper right-hand corner of high power and high interest.
Okay, good. Thank you. I have another question that came in from Alex on the chat. And by the way, for those of you looking at the bar for Zoom, Q&A box should be one of them. It's somewhere around chat, Q&A. I don't know the exact options you have on the Zoom, but it should be one of them. So the question asks, how do you balance, oops, sorry, my screen hides part of it. How do you balance team independence, e.g., empowerment, and the need for standardization that Ms. Ackers alluded to in her talk? More concretely, if we let every team members, e.g., create templates independently, how do you ensure that won't lead to chaos? I understand that giving a formula for this is impossible, but some general insights from your experience would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, so there's no single clear answer to this question. Again, um, when I'm teaching a course on project management, I always tell people that the best answer to any question about project management is it depends. So this is really all about a balance. So even though I'm talking about empowering team members, I'm not talking about empowering them to go off on their own, empowering them within the team. So the team needs to have a shared sense of purpose. And it is the responsibility of the team lead as well as the sponsor to share that vision with the other team members. And then as you continue doing planning and create the team charter or the RACI chart, you will reinforce those shared values and shared goals. But it's always about the team, it's not about individuals. And even within the team, you need to keep in mind the larger context, which is how is one project related to another project? Maybe one project is part of a program and it has a very close relationship with other projects. And how does it fit within the portfolio? So this is that multi-directional communication between the team and other project teams, with senior management communicating down and listening to the people at the team level, sharing their experience upward. So it is all about collaboration. And collaboration is multidirectional. And it also is about that shared goal, the shared vision. And this is probably the area where having some level of hierarchy would actually be most beneficial because you need to hear that message from the top down, and it needs to be consistent from the top down. So if the senior executive, the president, or the chairman of the organization has a vision, everybody in the organization should share that vision. If you are working on a project with an external funder, they have a vision for their project. You need to have the right level of communication to understand their vision and their goals. So when you emphasize collaboration, then the empowerment enhances the collaboration. It should never detract from collaboration.
Thank you so much, Mimi. I think this is excellent. So again, Mimi, thank you so much for that very, very thoughtful as well as detailed. And our hope is people here can take away and obviously apply it.